Hello. The question that I'm going to talk about today is one that I actually get a lot from researchers, but I also get it from some trainers and some athletes, but more from researchers. It's if actually a lot of researchers do this without ever asking about it, and then they get weird data sometimes, so I'm quite sure why it happens, and then we need to make sure that people are aware of the situation. So your NIRS device, so in this case our Moxies, they send out infrared light, and then they receive that light back, and that's how the measurement works. But I have a problem if I take two devices and I put them right beside each other, because they're both sending out light and they're both receiving light, and that can confuse the two devices because they assume that there's only one light source, right? It's the same as if you have all this ambient light coming into the sensor, you're going to get a bad reading as well. It's the same as if you just plop another sensor right next to it if it's too close. Understandably, if you have multiple Moxies, you might be interested in, well, what are my different quadriceps heads doing? What is my vastus lateralis doing? What is my rectus femoris doing? So you want to kind of put those on the same leg. The question is, so the concrete question was, well, how far apart do the Moxies have to be so that I can ensure that I'm actually still getting a reading that's accurate? That's a great question. Like I said, a lot of researchers have that because they want to put on EMG electrodes and they want to put on the Moxies and multiple Moxies on the same leg. And we need to make sure that we're getting good, clean data. So I'm actually going to do a little presentation to show how much distance we actually need. For that, I have two Moxies, and what I'm going to do is one of them, I'm going to turn the emitter off, so it's not going to send any light, so only the other one is. So one of them's receiving but not sending anything. And I'm going to play around with the distances. And then after, I'll graph it, and I'll put the graph up, and then we can take a look at what kind of distance we actually need to ensure that we're still getting clean measurements. So for that, what I've done, if you can take a look right here on my leg, I kind of draw up this nice little grid where I'm going to be moving the Moxies back and forth on, and then we're going to see how much interference there is. So I'm going to get started on that and move these back and forth, and you guys will get to see some graphing of those data points to figure out what the distance needs to be. Okay, so I did my measurements at a bunch of different distances, and we're gonna show that data. Now, I don't want to get too technical, but explain the graph that we're looking at right now. So what we get is basically we're going to these numbers at the bottom here, these 1 through 1, 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, 12. That has to do with the LED activation in series. Just how the lights are blinking at the different wavelengths to generate the measurement. So, and what we're looking at is actually a relationship between the two sensors and how much of the signal the sensor is, of the total signal that the sensor is receiving, is actual interference. And we want that number to be as low as possible. You don't want any interference. So we actually kind of look at values. We try to get values below 1% is what we're looking at. So this is at 179 millimeters. And you see, you generally, in most of the sequencing here, you get pretty low numbers. You've number 9 jumps a bit high here at 1.5%, which is a little bit high. And these other ones are all below 1%. Now, if we move a little bit closer, at 142 millimeters, you get all the values are really low, right? You get the orange ones are really low, much lower than blue. Actually, there might have been some other interference in my initial measure, so I didn't do such a good job there. So this orange value is looking much more what we're actually looking for. Now if I move a little bit closer, move the sensors closer together again, 125 millimeters, again I have a very low value, which is good. So I'm not really getting any interference. If I move to 100 millimeters, it actually is creeping up a little bit, but it's still very low. There really is no interference. I go to 79 millimeters, it's going up again a little bit here on the right in some of the sequencing, but really it's still very, very low value, so we're still pretty good. And when I go to 72, maybe creeping up a little bit more again, it's still very low though, so we're still getting good readings with very little interference. Now if I move it one more, whoa. Okay, now we see we're within 55 millimeters. You get these huge spikes up, right? And if I actually adjust the graph a bit to make the scaling adjusted, you actually see how much more it is now. So the interference from the other ones essentially go away because they were all below 1%. Essentially, there is no interference. And once I move in 55 millimeters, I'm getting a lot of interference, meaning it's much too close. These two devices are much too close together to get any kind of good reading. And if I go even closer, 28 millimeters, which is essentially two Moxies side by side, you see you get very large interference values. So the percentage of the signal from interference becomes really high. I hope that's easy to understand. Essentially, what this data shows you is that if anything closer than 6 centimeters, you're definitely getting complete interference. Our recommendation is actually to stay at least 100 millimeters, or at least 10 centimeters apart. Leave the sensors at least 10 centimeters apart. That would be the yellow number. So to make sure with enough buffer zone that you're really not getting interference, because there's going to be some technical differences depending on the type of person you're measuring and how much adipose tissue they have. There's a variety of technical factors that will actually affect on how much spacing you really need. So even if we said, well, it seemed like 72 millimeters was enough, it was enough in this case and in this example, but it might not be in another example. So for safety reasons, we really go with 100 millimeters of space between sensors to ensure that you're getting a good reading. Okay, so I hope that data makes sense for you, that it's clear. The distance that you actually need now the distance you need to separate your Moxies for. So thank you for listening. That was a great question. It's much more of a technical application question than physiology one, which is really good. So please ask me those types of questions as well, because the handling of the device is very important for getting good clean data. Thank you very much, and we'll see you guys next week.